Well, today I'm going to tell you about a few jobs that I would call hard to figure, because some of the jobs that we do, you think you kind of have the idea that you know what's going on, but then you get thrown a curveball. Some of them are fairly straightforward. I'm a sort of a raconteur, and I like to tell stories about repairs and stuff like that. Some of them are just basically fairly straightforward, but there are a couple of surprises in these right here. And first thing, I got this 2005 Dodge Caravan that came in. It belonged to one of the ladies that worked over at the college, and it had an erratic shift. Now she drove, her husband had a health problem. He had to drive to, 80 or 90 miles away to a big hospital up there once a month. And she started noticing an issue with it. Now she had a newer van, but she liked driving this one for whatever reason, because it was outfitted for husband's wheelchair or whatever it was, I don't remember. But it came in, transmission had screwball shift patterns. It wasn't slipping, but it didn't shift gears consistently either. She knew there was a problem with it. Now, not only were some of the shifts erratic and delayed, but there was no recognizable pattern. Sometimes the transmission would shift just fine, but it would just, this was a problem. It was just coming and going. It was just kind of wacky. Now, she took it to a transmission shop, and they told her she probably needed a radiator because it had water in the transmission fluid. And so they says, well, I put him, but it was her. But because there was a bit of water mixed with transmission fluid, they felt like, well, it's got to be something like that. Well, there wasn't much water in there. It is sort of mildly milky. But that transmission shop was not interested in doing the work on the transmission, nor were they even interested in replacing the radiator. Now, I will tell you that particular transmission shop is a good transmission shop, but they did not work on any Dodge or Chrysler transmissions. I don't know why. They liked Ford, they liked Chevy, and they would even do some Asian stuff, but for some strange reason they wouldn't work on Chrysler or Dodge. I don't know why their policy was like that, but it was. Now, to begin with, there was a bit of water in the fluid, and that's what it looked like. That's the actual dipstick I pulled out of there. But the cooler is external to the radiator on this one. It's not in the radiator, so it couldn't be a problem with coolant in the radiator mixing with the transmission fluid, and so replacing the radiator would be a pointless repair in this particular case. So I figured, well, did they drive through some high water, and maybe it went in through the vent, but that would have been a lot of driving through high water, and that would have been quite a little bit of water to go in there to milk the fluid up like that. And so I have no idea, unless somebody poured water in through the dipstick, how this water got in the transmission. So we went ahead and we pulled a P0700 code, made the decision to do a full fluid exchange with the machine, followed it by a filter change to clear the pan, and we replaced the shift solenoid assembly. It cost about $150. We got it from the parts store. And I figured, and I told her, I said, we're just going to do a Hail Mary thing here and see if we can get this thing straightened out just as quick and easy as possible. Now, she spent some money with the fluid. By the time you bought all the fluid, and like I say, I don't know how everybody else does this, but I would do the fluid exchange first and then follow up with a filter and pan. Drop the pan, clean it out, put a new filter in there, and put some more new fluid in there. So you're going to put a little, about, let's say if it takes 8 quarts of fluid to completely fill the transmission or the transaxle, you're going to use 8, plus you're going to use another however many, 4 or 5 that you would use if you were doing a regular transmission service. So you're actually buying a lot of fluid there, but you got new fluid throughout the transmission that way, and it's just a whole lot better way. We got rid of all this water that was in there, and there was no way any more could get in there as far as we know, because there was no egress point for water, since there was no external fluid leaks either. So anyway, it's still a mystery to me how that water got in there. So we went ahead and did that. And there was some glitter in the pan and some fine fuzz on the magnet, but with 150,000 miles on the clock, that's something I would kind of expect on just about any transmission. And after we replaced the fluid, the filter, and the shift solenoid, the code was gone, and it shifted well when we drove it. And I told her just to try it, let me know if she had any trouble with it. And like I say, once or twice a week, she was having to take her husband to down up the road. All right, so this transmission expert sounded off, and he called us everything including incompetent, because I wrote it up in a Motor Age article. And he said the transmission should be totally rebuilt if even a tablespoonful of water makes it into the transmission fluid. And so I checked with the lady, and this is months had gone by from the time I wrote the article, the time it went in the magazine, till the time he read it, the time he sent an email. It was probably 2.5, 3 months had gone by. And so I called her up because I had never heard anything back from her. And I says, tell me about the transmission, how's it doing? She goes, oh, it's just like brand new, just like it was when we first got it. And so I emailed this knothead back, and I says, look, buddy, the proof's in the pudding. You know, if you fix it and it stays fixed, why do we need to rebuild the transmission? You know, what's your rationale for that? I never heard back from him again. Well, this was an engine vibration that I said that the customer suddenly started noticing. And it was just a little, not too bad, it was just a little NVH concern. And she could feel the engine shaking the car when it was idling. She'd owned the car for a while, and the problem just came about all of a sudden. Turned out this rock was rammed in there between, and it doesn't seem like that would do that, but when we worked that rock out of that motor mount and put it back in there, it was smooth. You know, go figure. Sometimes vehicles that do a lot of mudding, you know, like the pickup trucks and stuff where they drive through the mud a lot and they get lots of mud caked in the mounts, will wind up, you'll feel it until you rinse all of that mud out of there, because it's transmitting the movement of the engine and the transmission into the frame, and it works it through the body, and the customer can feel it when they didn't used to. Running hot in traffic. This one came in, the complaint, it was running hot when you would sit still at the drive-through, at the bank drive-through, or whatever. And we tested the fan at the relay socket using my method of hooking the test light from the hot side and going to the terminal, going out to the fan. We turned the fan through, there was no continuity. I said, well, the fan must be totally open, but when we unplugged the fan, we found this, and that's why we didn't show any continuity through the fan. The fan itself tested okay, so we went ahead and just replaced this connector, and we polished the terminal as good as we could down in there inside the fan motor. I guess we could have replaced the fan motor, but I kind of like surgical repairs if possible. Only I tell the customer going in, I'm not going to replace the fan unless we have to have one, so pay attention, and if you have any more trouble with this, well, this one here never give any more trouble. Sometimes whenever if I don't want that terminal to get oxidized and lose and start dropping voltage, I will actually take some silicone dielectric grease like you buy from Motorcraft. They use it for caliper slides now, but originally it was for, you know, you put it in the spark plug wires when you put them on there. And the Motorcraft number used to be WA10, but I don't know what it is now. But I've got a tube of that stuff out there in my toolbox right now that I put in spark plug wires and stuff. Anyway, if I smear some of that stuff on the terminal and I slide it on there, it basically insulates it from oxygen that's going to oxidize it and cause it to start doing all that stuff. There used to be this funky clear gel that came when we were doing some of these airbag recalls where we would put the this clear stuff called Niogel, Niogel, on those terminals. And there's also this stuff you can buy called Stabilant 22, I think, that when you put it on there, it's supposed to make it make a plugged-in connection very, very conductive, better than, you know, just a regular metal-to-metal contact. But that Stabilant 22 stuff is doggone expensive stuff, I'm telling you. I don't know how much the Niogel costs, because they used to send it with some of the recall kits we did. Then you'd put it on wire terminals. But this Ford 15-passenger van, 1 ton, didn't drive quite right. The customer said it was all over the road. You know, don't you just love those kind of foggy descriptions of stuff, because you're really not used to driving that particular vehicle, and they may have noticed something different from the way it used to be that you wouldn't be privy to if you hadn't driven it before. And see, not every vehicle drives the same anyway. So this one here was all over the road. Well, new tires have been put on the rear, and that's the right way to do it. And they seemed a lot softer than they should have been. Now, even with the recommended 80 psi of air pressure, the front tires call for 50, the back one's 80 on this 15-passenger 1-ton van. And we moved the old tires to the rear, which goes against tire manufacturer recommendations, but it made the van drive a whole lot better. It was a lot more solid on the road that way, which I thought was very interesting. Although they were going to need to get some more tires and some different tires that were not so soft to put on the back. We didn't actually do the repair. I just told them this is what's going to have to happen. But you know, the new tires needed to be on the rear, but the firmer, harder tires that were the slightly older ones that were on the front, when they were moved to the rear, it changed the way that van felt all the way around the, all the way down the line. Now this 02 Crown Vic, I'm sorry, was all over the road. Let me pause for a second. Whenever I worked for this guy back in the 70s, and he would order parts, he would screw up. Instead of ordering a part for a 73 Chevy, he would screw up on the phone and say 53, because he'd been working on them that long. And me and the guy that worked at the shop used to laugh about that, because he would order 53 model parts when he meant to say 73 model parts, just telling them the wrong thing on the phone. I caught myself doing that in the 90s. If it was a 93, I'd say it was a 73, and then if it was an 03, I'd say it was a 93. I was making the same mistakes that my old boss man did back in 77. Anyway, we repaired a brake squeak just a couple of weeks earlier and didn't really notice any all over the road issues on that visit, but once again, the people that usually drove this car were used to that car driving the way that it did. And so they noticed something different about it, and I don't know how quick it came on, but this came on a lot slower than the van did, So I drove the car. I could tell the front end was kind of tight, and the steering almost wouldn't return to the center unless you helped it. Now, if you took my little quiz on the front end on the steering and suspension stuff last week, you might remember that caster is what enables the vehicle to come back to the center and all that. But this one here felt like something different. If caster is not, whenever you turn the wheels all the way to the left, if you got a tape measure out there in front of the bumper and you turn the wheels all the way to the left, the tape measure will indicate the bumper has risen, has come up 1.5 inches or so. You turn it back to the middle, it goes down as low as it's ever going to go. You turn it all the way back to the right, it goes back up. So it naturally wants to go to that lowest place in the middle, and that's what makes it return. This one wasn't returning unless you helped it. If you turned it, it would stay turned, and that didn't feel right. Okay, so we on the left, we took the front wheels clear of the ground, and I turned the steering wheel. The front end was stiffer than it ought to be. I'm talking about with it off the ground, it ought to run really easy with the engine not started. And so we popped the tie rod ends loose from the spindles, and both spindles were really kind of stiff and hard to move. That just wasn't right. They ought to move very easily. So we replaced the ball joints, the sway bar links, and the alignment, straighten that out. Now I will tell you, those ball joints, the boots like to bust on the ball joints on a lot of these Fords, and they'll actually get dry and squeaky. You might even hear them going squeak when you turn them, and when you look under there, you might see the boots gone, and the ball joint's not necessarily wore out, the boot's gone. But you can get boots if you want to go to the trouble to do it and not replace the ball joint, and you can pack a whole bunch of grease up in that joint, and you can put a new boot on it. Of course, the boots are various different qualities depending on where you get them. Put a new boot on there and put it back together. You can dodge a bullet on a ball joint if it's not worn out. There's no slack in it. It's just tight and rusty, Pack a bunch of grease in there. Now, you can take care of that. And they sell those boots for a reason, Now, another 05 Caravan had a strange rattling noise that was coming from the belt area. And it seemed to be tied to changes in engine speed. All right, so things would seem normal until you mildly accelerated into the service bay. Then it would come and go abruptly with changes in engine speed. It was a really odd noise. I had heard something similar with these overrunning pulleys. The overrunning pulleys that you see. I actually got that's a 17 millimeter hex, by the way, and you can take a bolt and braze it. It worked better. Brazing works better than welding for this. You can braze it into a socket, and you can make you a tool. It's just exactly like usually these things will actually come with a little 17 millimeter hex that you can put a socket on and screw them off there. But I happen to have one already because Volkswagen Bugs had a 17 millimeter hex in their transmission fill plug, although Volkswagen Bugs back in the day. And so I had one of those in my toolbox from when I worked at a Volkswagen place. Anyway, this overrunning generator pulley can cause funky noises like that. And those things love to make alarming noises. Even if they're still driving the alternator, sometimes they make funky noises. Now, what's in there? Now they're not all made the same way, but the ones that I've actually cut apart would have a couple of spiral springs in it. Now they'd have a weak one inside the pulley drum and a heavier one wrapped around the outer surface of the pulley hub. And that's the springs that make the pulley special. Give it that ability to freewheel whenever the alternator, whenever the belts operate. And you can look up why these overrunning pulleys are necessary. It's really an interesting reason that they put those on there. You can actually replace just the pulley too if you want to. The natural tendency of the springs to tighten up when they're torqued in one direction and loosen in the opposite direction gives the generator pulley the ability to grab or release the alternator rotor shaft when load and speed demands, change or omit. But when they fail, like this one did, they make a lot of funky noises. I cut that one apart and the spring was all busted up in there and all that kind of stuff. All right, this had to be an overrunning pulley issue, I thought, but when you pull that thing off, you can feel that pulley with your hand and you can tell if that's what the problem was. This one here didn't feel like a pulley problem. In other words, the pulley felt perfectly normal. And so I wasn't going to throw a $70 part at this thing without taking a closer look. So got it in the air, took another look, and our whole job had been on the ground. That's not a good plan. You need to raise the thing up and look under it, you know what I mean? All right, so with it flat on the ground, it wasn't smart. When we raised it up, one of the ears was broken off of the water pump flange. And this is a photo of that pump. And when we took those bolts out, you can see that one there, it just popped off of there, and that's where all that racket was coming from, so that one had to have a water pump. What you got to do to get that water pump even off of there is you got to take those bolts off and you turn this so that you can get the pulley off of it, because there's not a lot of room there, and that's why they make that pulley like that. But anyway, one of those three ears had broken off of there. Now, if you look and you pay attention, you can find stuff. Mechanic notices the movement of dust on the ground and figured out the fan was pushing air into the radiator, which is totally counterproductive. Instead of pulling it through it, you can use a piece of paper for that test too. If you stick a piece of paper down in front of the condenser, if it sucks it against the condenser, you'll know the air is going in. If it blows it away, you know it's going the wrong direction. This kind of thing usually happens when the fan is universal and it comes without a harness connector, or maybe with some, they want you to cut the harness connector if it's got a pigtail on it off of the old fan and put it on the new one. And if people aren't particular about the polarity, they'll have the fan spinning the wrong way. All right, there's some easy ones. It's 4:45 p.m. All the students were gone, and this math student that was doing a little extra work for credit came walking in and said, "Hey, my Trailblazer won't start." And so I went out with a scan tool, plugged it in, spun it over. There was no RPM signal. And also I pulled a crank sensor code. And so it took you could stand right here with that hood open on one of these straight 6 engines, or some of them got straight 5s in them, and reach right down there, and you could change that from standing right there. And that's what I did. I went down there, took the bolt out, pulled it out, called the parts store. She paid them $16 for the sensor when they got there, popped it in, fired it up. She drove away, and she was so happy. Well, she had been beat up and overcharged repeatedly by other mechanics. That's what she told me. And she thought I was some kind of a Superman that day whenever I was able to just figure that out and fix it in 15 minutes. And she didn't pay me $16 for the part. Well, this one farmer literally signed a blank check and left it with the cashier at the Ford place. He said, "Fix my truck, it's skipping." And so I drew the job. And I made sure that I did a surgical repair on that guy's truck, because the truck didn't have all that many miles on it, but as I remember, it had a spark plug wire that was leaking spark. And a lot of the times at the Ford dealer, I would replace just the spark plug wire that was bad. I wouldn't put a whole set on it, because they would sell single spark plug wires at the Ford dealer in those days, because warranty required that whenever you found a bad spark plug wire on a Ford that was under warranty, they wouldn't pay for a whole set of wires. They'd want you to just replace that one wire. And I did that a lot. I would replace it on customers' cars. There's no use putting all the wires on there. Let's just put one wire on there. And I fixed them like that a lot of times. Didn't have a comeback. This guy became one of our best customers because he was impressed that would you hand a blank check to a dealership and say, "Fix my truck"? Think about that for a minute. Well, when I saw it, they said, "This guy gave us a blank check. Just do whatever you want to." And I was to make darn sure that we didn't betray this guy's trust, What kind of concern can be caused by what you see here? Look at that for a minute. Some of you guys will know right away, you engine guys. What you got here is you got these ring grooves, stacked. They're supposed to be on opposite sides of the piston, and blow-by can go by there. And that's just a really important thing to look at. As a matter of fact, when my dad would tear an engine down, the first thing he would look at was to see if those ring grooves were stacked. And whenever he saw that, he knew that the cat was on the roof. And so if you're putting rings on pistons, of course, to begin with, make sure you don't put the rings on upside down. Secondly, make sure that these are on opposite sides. I even like to put that little gap on the oil ring on the opposite side with the other one and all that. You got to be careful when you're putting that oil ring on it. Make sure the separator's in there right and all that. All right, now that's going to be all for today, and there will be a pop test tomorrow. That's not necessarily going to cover this, but it's going to cover some other stuff. This has been a kind of a short video. I figured you guys would probably enjoy it anyway. And I will be talking to you guys next Monday, Lord willing. That's going to be, well, the date today, the way that you're watching this is Labor Day. Monday past Labor Day is the next time that you'll see a video from me, other than maybe some little spurious videos during the week that I throw out there. So actually spurious is not a good word for that, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys next time.